There has been a major data and security breach.
Last thing that anybody in the organisation wants to be hearing this evening.
An industrial scale breach of data.
This is the story of how the police service in Northern Ireland accidentally allowed the names and details of all of their staff to be published on the internet. It remains the biggest data breach in UK policing history. In this video, I'll talk about what happened, how it happened, and what we can learn from it. So first up, what happened? Back in August 2023, the PSNI, that's the police service in Northern Ireland, accidentally allowed the details of their staff, that's 9,438 employees, to be published online. If you're not familiar with the politics of Northern Ireland, it's had a long history of conflict and insurgency. And indeed, some people still see the police service in Northern Ireland to be an occupying force. There'll be folks who are part of that service who don't even tell their family members what they do for a living. They'll be very secretive, they'll be very protective of that information. So for it to be published on the internet is a huge deal. Back in December last year, the PSNI released a report about the breach, and that's what I'm basing this video mostly on, as well as some other information that's been revealed since then. And just this week, it's been announced that the Information Commissioner's Office is fining the PSNI over £700,000 as a consequence of the breach. And the reason this happened all comes down to three little dots. So how did this happen? In the UK, we have something called the Freedom of Information Act, and that allows the public to request information from public bodies. There's a wide list of bodies that will accept those requests, and there are some caveats and some restrictions of what will be released, but anybody can contact public authorities by and large and ask for data. To some people that may sound odd, but it's probably a really good thing for democracy and transparency. There's been some fascinating insights to how some of our public organisations work just from the outputs of Freedom of Information requests. But our story starts back in August 2023. The PSNI receive a Freedom of Information request, and it's asking for the number of officers at each rank and number of staff at each grade in tables as of the 1st of August 2023. Not an unreasonable question to ask a police force. 6 minutes later, they receive another Freedom of Information request. This one's very similar, but it's asking for the substantive ranks and a bit more data on the different roles. Under the Freedom of Information request scheme, if you get a couple of requests and they're very similar, you're allowed to combine them. And in this case, the PSNI combined these two FOI requests into one. Now, a key part of this story is that these two requests were made through a website called whatdotheyknow.com. It allows for, or it facilitates people to make these requests, but importantly, it publishes the answers online. So somewhere at the PSNI headquarters, these two requests have been received, they've been combined into one, and the next day they're sent to the Human Resources Department, because it's probably them that would hold the data on how many officers they have and what different ranks they are. Somebody within Human Resources starts processing this request, and they export data from various systems and bring it together in one spreadsheet. One of the data sources they use is from a tool called SAP. SAP does lots of things. One of them is holding HR data, and they basically take a big export of every staff member, their rank, their location, and a few more details. Importantly, this does include their full name. But they also export other data, and they bring that into other sheets. Because the two requests are a little bit complex, they need different data sources to answer it. So at this point, we've got a spreadsheet. It contains the names of every person that works for the police service in Northern Ireland. It's then passed to somebody else in HR to check that it does in fact answer the two questions in the Freedom of Information requests. Unfortunately, somewhere on this journey, the key sheet, the one in the spreadsheet that holds all of that personal, highly sensitive personal data, gets hidden in Excel, which means it's only visible because there's three dots at the bottom left of the Excel screen. Behind these three dots was a treasure trove of information. If you're somebody that doesn't like the PSNI, may want to identify the people that work for it, all of that information was there, hidden. So now we've got our spreadsheet, it's full of sensitive information, but some of it's been hidden from user view. In this review process, at some point, somebody's removed a bunch of the other sheets so that only one sheet is visible, even though the sheet with all the sensitive information exists. In the visible sheet, they think they've answered the 2 freedom of information requests. This then goes through a quality assurance process. Some of the formatting is changed, there's some checks done. And as far as the people processing this are concerned, they've answered the requests. And because they think they've answered it, they close it down, they send it back to the person that requested it. Remember, that is the website that publishes them online. And as soon as the website received the response, they put it online. Now, later that day, it was identified that the submission that had been sent out and put on the internet included this hidden sheet. It was online for about 2.5 hours, but it's known that it was downloaded multiple times and probably taken and put in the hands of people that don't like the PSNI. Unfortunately, like most data breaches, once the data's gone, there's very little an organization can do because it's out there, it's been on the internet, it's been downloaded, it's been copied. The PSNI's response was focused on helping their people understand the impact of this, providing threat assessments if necessary. People were moved. There was a lot of work done to try and protect the people that work for them. It's estimated that the cleanup for this, along with legal expenses, will come to almost £25 million. So what can we learn from this breach? Well, the report is very detailed and forthcoming about the state of cybersecurity, data protection and governance at the PSNI before the breach happened. Now, the PSNI were doing risk management and they had a risk register. However, information security and data protection didn't even feature. In the report, they even mentioned that they actually had an audit from the Information Commissioner's Office, and I'll quote this exact line from the report. The ICO found that there was limited assurance in relation to data protection, both governance and accountability, and information sharing, suggesting a lack of effective oversight to this area of the business. Now that's pretty damning that data protection just was not a priority for these folks, and people were telling them that. The report also talks about an audit in June 2019 about data protection at the PSNI that rated them adequate and created a long list of actions that they should have taken to improve the state of data protection, but the report couldn't find any evidence that any of these had been even progressed, let alone closed. The report also talks about the role of the data protection officer. Now, it sounds like the PSNI had one for a short period of time and didn't have one for a while. And even when they had one, it didn't report to a very senior level. So it must have been really tough for that person to get buy-in for these issues. Now, you would think that an organisation like the PSNI operating in a high threat environment would be used to dealing with very sensitive information like intelligence, for example. And the report speaks to this and says that within the PSNI, all information was treated as sensitive or secret, but there were very rarely exceptions to this. So for example, when somebody exported the entire list of employees of the PSNI to a spreadsheet, there was no protected marking applied to that, and clearly no process that would think, this is actually more sensitive than most information we handle, therefore we need to deal with it differently. Now, you might be thinking about DLP. So if you're not familiar with DLP, that's data loss prevention. Software that detects when your sensitive data is moving around or leaving your network or infrastructure. Well, the report alludes to the PSNI having DLP. It just wasn't able to detect this particular data leaving their network. And I've been involved in quite a few different DLP projects. They are pretty difficult tools to deploy and to operationalize. I think another thing we can learn from this breach, and what really comes through in the report, is the importance of senior ownership around information security and data protection issues. It's really obvious from, if you go through it and read the different quotes and different observations, that there was nobody senior within the organisation owning either information security or data protection. The report also underscores the lack of good governance within the PSNI. So for us as defenders, it's one to consider for our own organisations, but when things go wrong, somebody's going to lift the lid and look inside and try and figure out what was going on that made this event happen or allow this event to happen. And in the case of the PSNI, they didn't have policies or standards to share. There was no risk register, no evidence, no risk acceptance. They really weren't considering data and how they protect it within their operations. Another takeaway for us defenders is not just technical solutions, so data marking or DLP to help prevent this, and also not just policies and standards to define what folks should be doing to protect this data, but just good old-fashioned user awareness. Clearly, the folks that were handling this data just didn't have an understanding of its significance and the importance of protecting it. I've written before about how security is very similar to health. If you don't exercise, you eat badly, you don't sleep, you're probably going to get ill. And I think cybersecurity or InfoSec or data protection is very similar. If you don't have good governance, if you don't think about your risks, if you don't make your users aware, if you don't have good technical controls, you're going to have an incident. You don't need to be amazing at this, you don't need to be incredibly fit, you don't need to be running triathlons, but you've got to do the basics to help protect information. Now, for lots of organizations, data breaches are bad, undoubtedly. But in this case, in the environment where these folks are operating, it is a complete catastrophe that this information was on the internet and available for people to download. And in the ICO fine against the PSNI, they outlined that the organisation just completely lacked governance to prevent this kind of attack, and also brought a tangible fear of a threat to life for the employees. That's all I've got time for. I hope you found this video interesting. It's I think a fascinating story of a data breach and how easy these things can happen, but worryingly so within an organisation that should be good at this. And to leak information or have information breached in this way of their own employees really speaks to the challenges and the consequences if you're bad at this. So I hope you've learned something today. I hope it's been interesting. If you have, it'd be great if you could like this video, add a comment. Even better if you do subscribe. I'd really appreciate that. And I'll be back next time with more.